Picture this, a massive medieval bridge, its wooden beams groaning under the weight of a fully armored knight charging across when suddenly the structure begins to collapse. But just as disaster seems inevitable, a wild boar charges from the forest, wedging itself beneath the failing supports and holding the bridge together long enough for the knight to escape. Sounds like something out of a legend, doesn't it? Yet this is just one of countless stories where animals became the unsung heroes, or sometimes the unexpected villains of history's most critical bridges. Today, we're diving into the wild, untold tales of beasts that shaped the fate of medieval crossings, turning the tides of war, trade, and even entire civilizations. From elephants used as living siege engines to crush enemy defenses, to beavers whose dams rerouted rivers and forced engineers to rethink entire bridge designs, animals played roles far beyond what most history books reveal. These creatures weren't just bystanders, they were active participants in the drama of human progress. Imagine a world where the strength of a single ox could determine whether a bridge stood for centuries or collapsed before its first winter. Or where flocks of birds, nesting in the rafters of a stone arch, weakened it just enough to crumble under the next army's march. The line between nature and engineering was often blurred, and the results were as unpredictable as they were extraordinary. So why did animals hold such power over these vital structures? The answer lies at the intersection of instinct and ingenuity. Medieval builders had to contend with forces they barely understood: animal migrations, territorial behaviors, even the sheer weight of creatures seeking refuge in their designs. Sometimes, animals were deliberately enlisted as allies, like the dogs trained to guard bridge tolls, or the ravens whose nests were protected as omens of good fortune. Other times, they were forces of chaos, like the rats whose relentless gnawing doomed entire spans. This is a story of collaboration and conflict, where the fate of kingdoms hinged on the choices of creatures who never knew their own importance. By the end of this journey, you'll never look at a bridge or the wild animals around it the same way again. The white stag wasn't just a creature of myth, it was a warning. Medieval bridge builders whispered stories of its sudden appearances, its ghostly form flickering between trees moments before a bridge shuddered and fell. These tales weren't just fireside entertainment. They were survival lessons wrapped in symbolism. Animals, to medieval minds, were messengers, ravens nesting in a bridge's arches. A sign of strength, their presence believed to ward off evil spirits, but a lone heron standing motionless on the riverbank that could send workers packing, convinced the bridge was cursed. What's fascinating is how often these superstitions held a kernel of truth. Take birds avoiding unstable structures. Their keen sensitivity to vibrations made them unwitting engineers, their absence a red flag humans learned to heed. And it wasn't just birds. Folklore spoke of bridges guarded by spectral hounds, their howls echoing before collapses. In reality, dogs were often stationed as living alarms, their barks alerting towns to cracks or creeps. Even fish played a role. Some cultures believed salmon would refuse to swim under poorly built spans, their migrations altering to avoid weak foundations. This blend of observation and legend shaped decisions in surprising ways. In Northern Europe, certain bridges were deliberately built with hollow niches, not for decoration, but to encourage swallows to nest there. Their return each spring reassured communities the bridge still stood strong. Perhaps the most enduring symbol was the beaver. Medieval manuscripts praised them as master builders, their dams studied like blueprints. Some engineers even copied their interlocking wood techniques, dubbing certain designs beaver tooth bridges. Yet for all their reverence, animals could also be scapegoats. When London's old wooden bridge mysteriously tilted, many blamed a captured bear kept beneath it, its restless pacing said to have angered the river spirits. In truth, the bear was likely just pacing from stress, but the story stuck, weaving animal behavior into the bridge's legend. This dance between fact and folklore reveals something profound. In an age before stress tests and engineers, animals were the original inspectors, their instincts a language humans strain to understand. The deeper we dig, the clearer it becomes these symbols weren't just stories. They were a way to encode generations of practical knowledge. When a village avoided building where wolves frequently crossed, was it fear of the beasts or recognition that the wolves' chosen path marked stable ground? Even the dreaded white stag might have been a poetic warning against building in flood-prone areas where deer gathered before storms. Every myth, every omen, was a thread in the tapestry of survival, where watching the wild could mean the difference between a bridge that lasted centuries and one that vanished with the next thaw. Elephants didn't just walk across bridges, they rewrote the rules of how bridges were built. Picture a Khmer war elephant, its armor clanking, its tusks fitted with iron spikes, charging straight toward a wooden span meant to hold nothing heavier than a horse-drawn cart. The result, splinters flying, ropes snapping, and an entire army suddenly cut off from retreat or reinforcement. This was the terrifying reality of bridge warfare in the medieval world, where elephants weren't just animals, they were living, breathing siege engines. Armies quickly learned that a well-trained elephant could reduce a bridge to rubble in minutes, turning a strategic crossing into a death trap. But here's where it gets fascinating. Elephants didn't just destroy bridges. They inspired them. Take the Battle of the Hydaspes River, where Alexander the Great faced King Porus's legendary elephant corps. Knowing conventional bridges would collapse under their weight, Alexander's engineers devised something radical: floating bridges anchored deep into the riverbed, their platforms wide enough to disperse the force of each elephant's step. These weren't just bridges, they were feats of anti-elephant engineering. Some accounts even describe hidden pitfalls beneath the planks, designed to trip and destabilize charging beasts. The lesson was clear: if you couldn't stop elephants, you had to outthink them. Defenders, meanwhile, turned bridges into fortresses. In Southeast Asia, iron spikes called pavises were hammered into bridge railings, their points angled to gore any elephant reckless enough to charge. Others slathered wooden supports in chili paste or burning tar, exploiting the animal's sensitive skin and keen sense of smell. But perhaps the most ingenious countermeasure came from India, where engineers built singing bridges, structures with loose bamboo slats that clattered loudly underfoot. The noise spooked elephants, whose trainers could rarely convince them to cross. These weren't just tricks, they were early examples of psychological warfare, using an animal's instincts against it. Yet elephants weren't always instruments of destruction. In peaceful times, their strength made them indispensable builders. Thai chronicles describe how teams of elephants hauled massive stone blocks for bridge foundations, their precise movements guided by handlers' whispered commands. Some of these spans still stand today, their arches testaments to an unlikely partnership between human and beast. Even in war, elephants could be saviors, like the legendary Siamese elephant that, according to folklore, braved a collapsing bridge to carry its wounded king to safety, its body acting as a living support beam until he reached solid ground. The legacy of these creatures lingers in the language of engineering itself. Medieval blueprints often referred to the strongest bridge supports as elephant piers, a nod to their ability to bear unimaginable weight. And the next time you see a modern suspension bridge, remember, its design owes something to those ancient lessons in distributing force, learned through centuries of trial and error. much of it written in the footprints of elephants. Their story is a reminder that the best engineering doesn't fight nature, it learns from it. Beavers didn't just build dams, they built highways. These furry architects shaped medieval landscapes in ways we're only beginning to appreciate. A single beaver colony could transform a narrow stream into a sprawling wetland, their interwoven branches and mud creating natural crossings that deer, wolves, and even humans used for generations. Villagers quickly realized these accidental bridges had advantages. They were wide, stable, and constantly maintained by their toothy builders. Some communities even redirected trade routes to incorporate beaver dams, saving months of labor and resources. But this partnership wasn't always peaceful. When a beaver family in 12th century Yorkshire dammed the River Aire, they didn't just create a bridge, they drowned an entire valley of crops. The flooding was so severe that King Henry Roman II sent royal engineers to dismantle the structure, sparking one of history's first recorded conflicts between human infrastructure and animal instinct. What's remarkable is how they did it. Rather than destroying the dam completely, workers left strategic gaps like medieval speed bumps to control water flow while still allowing beavers to maintain the crossing. This uneasy compromise reveals how deeply medieval societies understood balance with nature. The beaver's genius lay in its techniques. Their dams used a crisscross pattern of branches that medieval builders later copied, calling it beaver weave construction. Some bridges in northern Europe still show this influence, with timber arranged at precise 45-degree angles to distribute weight, a direct steal from nature's playbook. Monasteries near wetlands often kept beaver colonies as living textbooks, their dams studied by monks who recorded observations in illuminated manuscripts. One 13th century sketch from a French abbey shows a beaver dam labeled God's First Bridge, with detailed notes on how its curved shape prevented erosion. Yet beavers also posed unique challenges. Their habit of sudden repairs could turn a reliable crossing into a flooded trap overnight. In the Baltic region, traders told stories of wagons vanishing into newly deepened waters when beavers reinforced their dams during spring rains. Some towns appointed beaver wardens to monitor activity, armed with poles to carefully adjust water levels without provoking the animals. This delicate dance of coexistence speaks volumes. Medieval people saw beavers not just as pests, but as partners in engineering, their instincts respected even when inconvenient. The legacy of these aquatic builders endures in unexpected ways. Modern engineers now recognize that beaver dams reduce bridge erosion by slowing water flow, a fact medieval villagers observed empirically. And those iconic arched bridges of the Middle Ages, their curved designs may owe more to beaver dams than we thought. Nature's blueprint for withstanding pressure, perfected over millennia. So the next time you cross a wooden footbridge, look closely. You might just see the ghost of a medieval beaver's tooth marks in the timber, a silent reminder that some of our greatest structures began with a rodent's gnawing instinct. Wolves didn't just haunt the forests, they shaped the very stones beneath travelers' feet. Across Europe's most treacherous ravines, so-called Devil's Bridges rose from the cliffs, their arches seemingly too perfect, too daring to be human work. Legends whispered that wolves were the true architects, their nightly howls not warnings of danger, but instructions to builders. The Teufelsbruch in Germany's Harz Mountains tells one such tale. Locals claimed packs gathered at dusk to pace specific routes, their paws tracing invisible lines where the bedrock was strongest. Builders who followed these paths supposedly raised bridges that stood for centuries, while those who ignored them saw their work crumble by spring thaw. But why wolves? Medieval minds saw them as liminal creatures, neither fully of this world nor the next. Their uncanny ability to vanish into mist or appear without sound made them perfect candidates for supernatural bridge lore. Some stories describe wolves materializing to block travelers from weakened sections, their growls shaking snow from unstable ledges. Others tell of lone wolves leading lost children across crumbling spans, their precise footsteps revealing hidden supports. The truth lies somewhere between myth and observation. Wolves instinctively avoid loose rock and eroding soil, their preferred trails often following the most geologically stable paths, a fact shrewd builders noted. The connection went deeper than practicality. Many Devil's Bridges feature wolf carvings at their keystones, not as decorations but as spiritual safeguards. In the Swiss Alps, certain bridges were deliberately built with narrow parapets just wide enough for a wolf to walk single file, a design believed to channel their protective energy. Some Nordic sagas even describe wolf stones, special rocks placed at bridge foundations that were said to howl when the structure weakened. Modern engineers now think these were hollow stones that amplified wind or water sounds, creating an early warning system that villagers attributed to spectral canines. Perhaps the most fascinating twist comes from France's Pont du Loup, where medieval masons left intentional gaps in the mortar. Local law insists these were wolf windows, allowing spirits to pass through without damaging the bridge. In reality, the gaps relieved pressure during freeze-thaw cycles, but the wolf connection persisted. Even today, maintenance workers in some alpine regions check for paw prints near bridge joints, a centuries-old habit born from the belief that wolves still inspect their handiwork. This blend of reverence and pragmatism reveals a profound medieval truth. Sometimes, the best engineering solutions came not from defying nature, but from watching it closely. Wolves may not have been supernatural bridge builders, but their instincts helped humans read landscapes in ways no textbook could teach. The next time you see an old stone arch spanning a roaring gorge, look closely. You might just find the ghost of a paw print in the mortar, a silent testament to the four-legged surveyors who helped chart civilization's path. Birds didn't just nest on bridges, they diagnosed them. Medieval engineers noticed something peculiar. Swallows would cluster on certain arches while ignoring others, their choices revealing hidden truths about the stone beneath. These tiny creatures became unwitting inspectors, their nesting habits a living blueprint of structural health. In the floating city of Venice, builders watched for dark-eyed swallows darting beneath bridges. If the birds avoided a span, workers knew to check for rotting pilings before the next tide. It wasn't superstition, it was science in feathers. Swallows possess an extraordinary sensitivity to vibration, abandoning any structure that hummed with instability long before human hands could feel the danger. Crows played an equally vital role, though for different reasons. Their heavy nests, bulky twig fortresses weighing as much as a small child, only appeared on the stoutest stone arches. A bridge covered in crow nests became a mark of pride for medieval towns, proof their masons had outwitted gravity itself. Records from Chester Cathedral describe how monks would scatter grain near new bridges, not as charity, but as bait to attract these black-feathered engineers. If the crows stayed to build, the bridge was blessed. If they flew on, builders would whisper of hidden flaws and secretly reinforce the foundations. The relationship went deeper than mere observation. Some bridges were deliberately designed to welcome avian tenants. The Ponte Vecchio in Florence still bears swallow-friendly niches under its arches, while the arches of Spain's Puente del Diablo were intentionally roughened to help martins grip the stone. This wasn't decoration, it was medieval crowdsourcing, turning birds into permanent monitoring systems. Their yearly return became a living audit. Abandoned nests signaled decay invisible to the human eye. Perhaps the most astonishing example comes from 12th century France, where the collapse of the St. Benezet Bridge sparked an Avian revolution. Survivors claimed the disaster had been foretold weeks earlier by the sudden departure of resident swifts. From then on, Avignon's bridgekeepers kept meticulous bird logs, tracking nesting patterns like modern engineers read stress gauges. Their records reveal how swallows would avoid sections where mortar was failing, their absence providing early warnings that saved countless lives. This feathered vigilance even influenced bridge design. Gothic arches, with their precise curves and even weight distribution, didn't just please the eye, they created ideal nesting conditions. The wider the arch, the more stable the air currents for swooping swallows. Some historians argue that Europe's iconic arched bridges evolved partly to attract these winged guardians, their shapes perfected through centuries of trial and error under a bird's discerning gaze. The legacy of these feathery consultants endures in surprising ways. Modern engineers studying the London Millennium Bridge's infamous wobble discovered that pigeons had abandoned it weeks before humans noticed the sway. Today, ornithologists collaborate with construction teams, using bird behavior as an ecological early warning system. So next time you see swallows dancing beneath an ancient arch, remember you're witnessing the oldest quality control inspection in history, written not in ledgers but in nests. Horses didn't just cross bridges, they redesigned them. Every curve, every stone, every inch of medieval bridge engineering bore the hoofprint of these indispensable animals. Take the packhorse bridges of England's Peak District, their arches deliberately built low and wide. This wasn't architectural flair, it was survival. A spooked horse leaping sideways could send precious cargo tumbling into rapids below, so builders added breastwork walls just high enough to block panicked kicks while allowing riders to duck under low branches. These subtle adaptations reveal how deeply bridge design was shaped by equine psychology. The rhythm of hooves even dictated materials. Cobblestones on major crossings like Paris Petit Pont weren't laid randomly. Their precise spacing matched the average horse's stride, creating natural traction that prevented slips in rain or snow. Archaeologists have found where patterns showing horses consistently stepped where stones were slightly roughened, a medieval version of non-slip treads. Some Italian bridges went further, embedding horseshoe-shaped iron plates into the stone where animals typically pivoted, reducing wear and tear from constant turning. Weight distribution became an obsession. When London Bridge was rebuilt in stone, its piers were widened not for aesthetics, but because too many carts had gotten stuck mid-span when nervous horses balked at the narrow passage. The solution: horse alleys, slightly broader sections where animals could briefly step sideways without colliding. This seemingly small adjustment prevented traffic jams that once lasted hours. Meanwhile, in mountainous regions, bridges featured gradual approach ramps at exactly 17 degrees, the steepest angle most laden horses could climb without refusing. Perhaps the most ingenious horse-inspired feature was the false ford. Many medieval bridges included shallow, rubble-filled sections downstream where panicked animals could be safely diverted if they refused to cross. These weren't accidents, they were carefully constructed safety valves that saved countless horses and merchants' livelihoods from watery graves. Records from the Champagne fairs describe how certain bridges became trade favorites simply because their design calmed skittish young horses with strategically placed screen walls that blocked dizzying views of rushing water. The legacy of these equine engineers lingers in modern standards. Today's minimum bridge widths trace back to medieval cart measurements, while the concept of breakaway rails evolved from those low packhorse walls. Even highway guardrails owe their height to centuries of observing how horses react to edges. So the next time you drive across an overpass, remember, you're traveling on roads shaped by four-legged consultants who never saw a blueprint, but whose instincts built the world. Rats turned timber into ticking time bombs, one gnaw at a time. While elephants and beavers dominated the stories of bridge construction, these small, relentless creatures wielded destruction on a scale that terrified medieval engineers. The collapse of the Pont de Maloney in 1281 wasn't caused by war or weather, but by an unseen army of rats whose teeth had methodically hollowed out the bridge's oak supports. When the final beam gave way, taking 12 merchants and their carts into the river below, townsfolk didn't blame poor craftsmanship. They spoke of a silent siege, where whiskered invaders could topple what armies could not. The secret lay in their biology. A rat's incisors grow continuously, forcing them to chew constantly to keep them sharp, and wooden bridges, soaked with road salt and food scraps from passing travelers, became all-you-can-gnaw buffets. What made rats particularly deadly was their invisibility. Unlike a crumbling arch or leaning pier, their damage happened inside beams, leaving surfaces deceptively intact until the moment of collapse. Bridge keepers in maritime cities like Bruges even developed a grim test, tapping supports with hammers and listening for the hollow echo of rat-carved caverns beneath the wood. Desperate towns fought back with ingenuity. The London Bridge's famous starlings, those pointed wooden barriers around its piers, weren't just for deflecting debris. Their sharp angles prevented rats from climbing to the main structure, creating a medieval version of rodent moats. Some German bridges incorporated catwalks, narrow ledges beneath the deck where feral cats could patrol, their presence alone enough to deter infestations. But the most ingenious solution came from Venice, where engineers embedded crushed oyster shells into bridge mortar. The sharp edges lacerated rats' paws, turning the structures into fortress walls too painful to scale. Nature's own pest control became part of the design. Owl boxes built into bridge towers weren't decorative. They housed feathery assassins whose nightly hunts kept rodent populations in check. Records from the Rhine Valley show bridges with specially designed predator portals, small openings that allowed weasels and ferrets to slip inside beams and hunt where humans couldn't reach. In Spain, certain bridges even featured hollow parapets filled with nesting hornets, whose aggressive territoriality created no-fly and no-gnaw zones. Yet rats had their accidental allies. Medieval cities' garbage-strewn streets provided endless food, while the warmth of bridge toll houses, often built directly onto the structures, offered perfect winter shelter. Some historians argue that the Great Famine of 1315 was worsened by rat-damaged bridges collapsing, cutting off grain transport routes when they were needed most. This ecological domino effect reveals a harsh truth. The mightiest bridge could fall not to a siege engine, but to the collective nibbling of creatures weighing less than a loaf of bread. The legacy of this hidden war lingers in modern preservation. Today's restorers of medieval bridges often find the original wood pockmarked with centuries-old rat tunnels, now filled with epoxy like dental cavities. Infrared scanners have replaced the old hammer tests, but the goal remains the same: to outwit nature's most persistent engineers, perhaps the ultimate irony. Some of the strongest surviving wooden bridges owe their longevity to an unlikely factor: being built near bat colonies. The guano-rich environment repelled rodents, proving once again that medieval builders, whether they knew it or not, were masters of ecological judo, using one creature's habits to thwart another's. Oxen didn't just pull stones, they shaped the mathematics of medieval engineering. The construction of Spain's Puente de Alcantara offers a striking example. Each massive granite block was precisely sized to match what a team of 8 oxen could drag up the specially built earthen ramps. These ramps weren't simple inclines, they spiraled at exact gradients calculated from years of observing how oxen shifted their weight when pulling, turning brute force into a precise science. Records from the bridge's construction show master masons consulting with ox drivers before cutting stones, adjusting dimensions by finger widths to match the animal's pulling rhythms. The true genius lay in the details. Ox paths became permanent features of the landscape, their deeply worn ruts repurposed as foundation trenches for new bridges. In France's Dordogne region, archaeologists have found ox trails leading directly to quarry sites, their zigzag patterns revealing how teams navigated slopes, knowledge later codified into engineering manuals as ox geometry. Some bridges still bear the grooves of countless ox-drawn sledges, their polished channels acting as natural guides for placing stones during construction. These animals were more than living cranes, they were mobile measuring systems. Medieval builders developed an entire unit of weight called the ox load, typically around 1,500 pounds, which determined everything from block sizes to pulley designs. The famous Devil's Bridge at Sarrat was constructed using stones never exceeding this weight, ensuring teams could work continuously without exhausting their beasts. Account books from the period show meticulous records of oxen rest periods, their care often costing more than the wages of human laborers. Tributes to these creatures abound in bridge architecture. The Pont Valentre in Cahors features carved oxen heads protruding from its towers, not as decoration but as spiritual guardians believed to lend their strength to the structure. In Prague's Charles Bridge, a worn relief shows an ox team mid-pull, their muscles straining, a rare medieval acknowledgement of animal labor. Even bridge names honored their contributions, like England's Oxenbridge in Kent or Switzerland's Ochsenbrück, both built along traditional drover routes. The legacy of ox-powered construction lives on in unexpected ways. Modern engineers studying the Puente de Alcantara discovered its blocks fit together with uncanny precision, a feat made possible by ox teams pulling each stone along the exact same path every time, creating consistent friction patterns that helped masons achieve perfect alignment. Those spiral ramps, their design influenced modern highway interchange models. And the next time you see a truck hauling construction materials, remember, its weight limits trace back to those medieval ox load calculations, proving that some engineering solutions are truly timeless. Perhaps the most poignant reminder sits in a quiet corner of Portugal's Ponte de Lima. There, a weathered stone marker shows the outline of an ox team at rest, their handler's staff leaning against the bridge parapet. It carries no grand inscription, just a simple truth carved where generations of drivers could see it. The stones remember what the scrolls forget. A silent tribute to the four-legged giants who carried civilization on their backs, one patient step at a time. Salmon weren't just swimming upstream, they were drafting blueprints. Medieval builders from Scotland to Siberia noticed something remarkable. Bridges erected where salmon pooled during spawning seasons stood firm for generations, while those built against the fish's preferred paths crumbled within decades. The reason lay hidden in the physics of riverbeds. Salmon instinctively seek out stretches where water flows at the perfect speed, fast enough to keep the riverbed clear of silt, but slow enough to avoid destabilizing the gravel beneath. These same conditions, it turns out, created ideal foundations for bridge piers. The fish had become living plumb lines, their annual migrations revealing the most geologically stable points in otherwise treacherous waters. Eels played an equally vital, if more ominous, role. Their sudden disappearance from certain bridge sites often preceded catastrophic collapses. Unlike salmon, eels thrive in turbulent, ever-shifting sediments. When they abandoned an area, it signaled that the riverbed was becoming too unstable even for these adaptable creatures. In the Netherlands, bridge keepers maintained eel logs, recording populations near foundations like medieval seismographs. Some Venetian manuscripts describe how engineers would lower baskets of live eels beneath suspect piers. If the creatures refused to stay, emergency repairs were ordered immediately. The most ingenious aquatic allies may have been freshwater mussels. Their presence near bridge foundations wasn't just a sign of clean water. Their unique method of anchoring themselves to rocks actually strengthened the riverbed. Medieval builders in the Loire Valley deliberately seeded mussel colonies around new piers, creating what we'd now call living breakwaters. These mollusks' byssal threads, those sticky fibers they used to cling to surfaces, bound loose stones together in a natural mesh that resisted erosion better than any human-made mortar. Modern studies of surviving medieval bridges confirm that piers with thriving mussel populations show significantly less wear than those without. Even the humble minnow contributed to bridge lore. Their shoaling behavior became an early warning system for scour, the dangerous erosion that undermines foundations. When minnows began avoiding the shadowed areas beneath certain arches, it often meant the riverbed was being carved away invisibly below. Some English monasteries kept minnow ponds near their scriptoriums, not for food, but as reference specimens to compare against river populations. The Book of Ely contains detailed sketches of minnow shoal patterns labeled signs of safe crossing and omens of ruin. This aquatic wisdom was codified in surprising ways. The 12th century laws of Oleron, governing maritime trade across Europe, actually mandated fish surveys before bridge construction could begin. In Scandinavia, certain bridges featured fish windows, small openings in the piers that allowed builders to observe aquatic activity inside the structure itself. The greatest testament to this partnership endures in Scotland's Dee bridges, where centuries-old carvings of salmon adorn the keystones, not as decoration, but as silent reminders of nature's original engineers. Their gilded scales still catch the light, a shimmering tribute to the Finn surveyors who helped chart humanity's path across the waters. Bridges guarded by bears, it sounds like something from a fairy tale, but in the misty passes of the Carpathians, this was survival strategy at its most ingenious. The so-called bear bridges of Transylvania weren't just crossings. They were carefully maintained ecosystems where humans and apex predators struck an uneasy bargain. Picture a timber bridge at dusk, its planks worn smooth by countless cartwheels, and looming in the shadows a massive brown bear, its presence announced by the sharp crack of twigs underfoot. To travelers, that sound was better than any armed escort. Bandits who might ambush a merchant caravan at dawn would think twice when the bridge's resident bear had been fed freshly slaughtered goats the night before. What's fascinating is how deliberate this system became. Villagers didn't just tolerate the bears, they actively cultivated their loyalty. Chronicles from Brasov detail bridge feasts, where locals piled fish guts and honeycomb at specific intervals along the railings, conditioning the bears to patrol like fuzzy sentries. The bears, in turn, learned to associate human structures with easy meals, defending their territory against wolves and thieves with a vested interest. Merchants paid a premium for these protected crossings, their tolls recorded in ledgers as Ursus tax, literally the bear's share. But the real engineering marvel lay in the bridges themselves. Many were built with bear behavior in mind. Wider than average platforms gave the animals space to move without feeling cornered, while strategically placed logs acted as scratching posts to keep them lingering near vulnerable spots. Some even featured bear bolts, iron rings where food could be secured, forcing the animals to work at extracting it long enough to deter would-be attackers. The bridges became stage sets for a carefully choreographed dance between species, each playing their part. Not all bears were cooperative, of course. Records from Kronstadt tell of one particularly clever so who learned to shake the bridge's planks until terrified merchants abandoned their cargo. She then sauntered down to collect her spoils, a medieval protection racket run on claws and cunning. Yet even these rogue operators served a purpose. Their antics inspired innovations like counterweighted decks that swayed less under bearish antics, making crossings safer for everyone. The legacy of these arrangements lingers in surprising ways. Modern wildlife crossings, those green bridges designed to help animals traverse highways, owe a conceptual debt to the bare bridges, proving that the best solutions often blur the line between human and wild. And if you hike the old trade routes today, keep an eye out for worn grooves along certain railings. They might just be the tooth marks of history's most unconventional security guards, forever etched into the wood. Camels didn't just carry goods across deserts, they mapped entire trade routes with their footsteps. The so-called camel bridges of the Silk Road weren't grand stone arches, but subtle stone pathways barely wider than a dromedary's shoulders, their curves following ancient migration trails worn into the earth by countless padded feet. What looked like random rock piles to the untrained eye were actually precision engineering, each stone placed to match a camel's natural stride of about 5 feet, preventing the animals from breaking rhythm and wasting precious energy. Rest stops weren't placed where builders wanted them, but where camels instinctively paused, their bodies attuned to distances that conserved water and strength in the blistering heat. The real genius lay in the warning system these creatures provided. When a lead camel hesitated before a crossing, its nostrils flaring at the scent of unstable ground, entire caravans would halt. Traders trusted this instinct more than any engineer's assessment. There are accounts of perfectly sound-looking bridges being abandoned for months after a single camel's refusal, only for flash floods to later reveal hidden erosion beneath the foundations. Some Silk Road manuscripts describe test camels, elderly animals with decades of route knowledge who were sent ahead to assess new bridges. Their approval was worth more than a dozen signed permits. Adaptations to camel behavior went beyond mere practicality. The bridges of the Ustiert Plateau featured low, sloping approaches because camels, unlike horses, refused to step up onto high platforms. Their stone surfaces were often studded with smooth pebbles, mimicking the texture of hard-packed desert trails their feet preferred. Even the famous, singing bridges of the Taklamakan Desert, whose planks hummed in the wind, served a purpose. The vibrations soothed skittish camels, their frequency matching the low drones of desert winds the animals found comforting. Perhaps the most startling example comes from the lost bridge of Tash Rabat. When archaeologists uncovered its remains, they found the structure angled slightly northwest, a seemingly irrational design until they realized it aligned with the autumn migration path of wild Bactrian camels. By following nature's blueprint, builders ensured their man-made crossing would never be without the pathfinding wisdom of the original desert navigators. This symbiotic relationship reshaped cultures. Toll records show camel-friendly bridges commanded higher fees, their keepers often maintaining salt licks and thorn bushes favored by the animals. Some caravanserais even employed camel whisperers, specialists who could interpret every grunt and ear twitch as structural feedback. The legacy lingers today. Modern highway rest stops in Central Asia still follow the same spacing as those ancient camel bridges, proving that good engineering transcends species. When you see a trucker pulling over at a lonely desert halt, they're unwittingly honoring a tradition older than the Silk Road itself, the rhythm of the camel's march, forever etched into the bones of the land. Falcons didn't just hunt from castle towers, they became the airborne guardians of bridges, their razor-sharp talons defending stonework from an unlikely enemy, pigeon droppings. At Spain's Alcantara Bridge, keepers maintained a permanent falconry station high atop the central arch, where trained peregrines stood watch like feathery sentinels. Their mission, to patrol the skies above the Roman-era structure, intercepting flocks of pigeons whose acidic waste could eat through mortar joints in a matter of years. Records show this biological maintenance added centuries to the bridge's lifespan, proving sometimes the best preservation tool isn't a chisel, it's a predator's cry slicing through the morning mist. The system was more sophisticated than it appeared. Falcons weren't simply released to hunt at will. Their flights followed precise schedules synchronized with pigeon migration patterns. Bridge logs from Toledo detail how birds were flown at dawn and dusk when pigeons most threatened to roost, creating a psychological barrier as effective as any physical deterrent. Some towers even employed different falcon species for specialized roles, swift merlins to scatter large flocks, while powerful gyrfalcons handled stubborn individuals that dared to linger. The result was an elegant balance, enough predation to deter pests, but not so much that pigeons abandoned the area entirely and forced the falcons to seek food elsewhere. This feathered defense system left its mark on bridge architecture itself. The parapets of Portugal's Pont de Lime, a feature unusual outward curving projections originally designed as perfect launch platforms for falcons, giving them instant elevation to strike. Many medieval bridges incorporated mews chambers beneath their arches, complete with perches and bathing pools to keep the birds in peak condition. At Germany's Bockenheim Bridge, archaeologists found grooves in the stonework that once held leathered jesses, allowing falconers to tether multiple birds along the span like living scarecrows. The economic impact was profound. Bridges with resident falcon colonies commanded higher tolls, their reputation for cleanliness attracting elite merchants. In France, the droit de faucon, falcon right, became a coveted bridge-keeping privilege, granting the holder income from both travelers and the sale of molted feathers used in quill pens. Some Italian cities even employed blind falcons, birds with hoods permanently attached whose mere presence on a perch could panic pigeons through scent alone, a medieval example of psychological warfare. The practice's legacy endures in modern preservation. Conservationists studying Venice's Rialto Bridge recently reintroduced falconry after discovering that modern deterrents like nets and spikes accelerated stone decay by trapping moisture. Today's bridge falcons wear tiny GPS backpacks, their flight patterns analyzed to optimize coverage, a high-tech echo of medieval keepers who once mapped patrol routes by observing which arches stayed cleanest. So the next time you see a bird of prey circling a historic span, look closely. You might be witnessing the oldest form of architectural conservation still in use, passed down through generations of both human and avian guardians. Goats didn't just graze near bridges, they became living lawnmowers with a vital engineering role. High in the Welsh mountains, the Pontafinac Bridge stands as a testament to this unusual partnership, its stones still bearing the faint scuff marks of generations of hooves. Unlike modern weed killers or labor-intensive clearing crews, these sure-footed creatures could scale near vertical slopes to nibble away at the very roots that threaten to pry apart mortar joints. Their constant grazing created a perfect equilibrium, enough vegetation to stabilize the soil, but never so much that invasive plants could gain a destructive foothold. The real brilliance lay in their selectivity. Goats instinctively avoid toxic plants like ivy and foxglove, precisely the species whose roots secrete acids that erode stone. Medieval bridge keepers noticed that goat-tended spans required fewer repairs, their surfaces remaining clear of the moss that made wet stones treacherously slick for travelers. Some Welsh accounts even describe goats being trained to target specific plants, their collars fitted with small bronze bells that chimed differently when they grazed near designated problem zones, alerting herdsmen to particularly stubborn growth. Annual goat parades weren't just quaint traditions, they served as living inspections. When the animals were ceremonially driven across Pontafinac each spring, observers watched their path closely. If goats hesitated or altered their usual route, it often signaled subsidence or hidden cracks beneath the vegetation. This practice was so effective that similar ceremonies spread to the Alps, where Swiss bridges employed chamois goats for high-altitude maintenance. The animals' ability to detect subtle vibrations through their hooves made them early warning systems long before modern sensors existed. Bridge design adapted to accommodate these furry groundskeepers. Many Welsh crossings feature recessed, browsing ledges and narrow outcrops where goats could stand while pruning vegetation beyond human reach. Some parapets incorporated salt licks at strategic intervals, encouraging the animals to linger near vulnerable joints. The most ingenious adaptation might be the goat stairs found on certain Italian bridges, alternating stone blocks protruding slightly from the facade, creating footholds that allowed goats to access every inch of the structure like fuzzy, four-legged rock climbers. This tradition's legacy extends beyond nostalgia. Modern engineers studying Pontafinac discovered its goat-maintained mortar has unusual resilience, likely because constant light grazing allowed for slower, stronger regrowth of beneficial mosses. Some preservation societies now replicate this approach. The Guardians of the Forth Bridge in Scotland recently introduced a herd to control vegetation after chemical treatments damaged 19th-century ironwork. As we search for sustainable conservation methods, these medieval practices remind us that sometimes the best technology comes on four legs, with a voracious appetite and a knack for keeping history intact one nibble at a time. The stone lions of Prague's Charles Bridge may seem like mere decorations today, but their roaring ancestors once played a far more fearsome role. Across medieval Europe and Asia, live lions became living symbols of bridge security, creatures whose very presence was meant to telegraph invincibility. Crimean port of Kaffa took this idea to terrifying extremes in 1384, when Geno's defenders chained a captured African lion beneath their strategic bridge. The plan was simple: let its thunderous roars rattle approaching Ottoman scouts, but the lion had other ideas. When the invasion force finally arrived, the starving beast snapped its chains and charged, not at the enemy, but at the Geno's soldiers who'd forgotten to feed it. The ensuing chaos allowed Ottoman sappers to sabotage the bridge unimpeded, turning a would-be deterrent into a catastrophic liability. This wasn't an isolated incident. Records from Venetian-controlled Crete describe how a bridge lion, kept to frighten pirates, developed a taste for mule flesh, decimating supply caravans until locals staged an uprising to have it removed. The irony was lost on no one. The creature installed to protect trade routes had become their greatest threat. Yet the practice persisted because when it worked, the psychological impact was unmatched. The Shah Bridge in Isfahan famously kept two white lions during peak trading seasons. Their alabaster coats dyed with saffron to glow like specters in the moonlight. Merchants swore the beasts could sense dishonesty, their growls escalating when smugglers tried to cross, a reputation so potent that toll revenues reportedly tripled during their tenure. The line between myth and reality often blurred. Many lion bridges never hosted live animals at all, but played into the legend through clever theatrics. Engineers at Rhodes Grandmaster's Bridge hollowed out their marble lion statues, stationing slaves inside to mimic roars using bronze resonators. Others employed more gruesome methods. The the Lion's Gate Bridge in Nuremberg displayed taxidermied specimens that were periodically replaced, creating the illusion of immortal guardians. Modern visitors admiring their silent snarls seldom realize they're seeing the last remnants of a medieval arms race, one fought not with catapults, but with carefully curated terror. What fascinates most is how these schemes influenced bridge architecture itself. The pointed arches common to lion-protected spans weren't just aesthetic, their steep angles prevented big cats from climbing onto the roadway. Railings were often spaced precisely to foil leaping attacks, while some Venetian bridges featured hidden dropping platforms that could release emergency food supplies to pacify agitated animals. Even the iconic lion statues we see today served practical purposes. Their gaping mouths frequently concealed rainwater spouts, turning decorative elements into functional drainage systems. Perhaps the greatest testament to their legacy lies in language. The term lion's share originally referred to the portion of bridge tolls reserved for feeding these expensive mascots. And when we speak of bridging gaps today, we unknowingly echo an era when that act demanded both human ingenuity and animal might. A time when crossing a river might mean locking eyes with a living emblem of power, its claws leaving permanent scratches in the stone beneath your feet. Bats didn't just inhabit bridges, they tuned them. High in the vaulted arches of medieval spans, these nocturnal creatures became unwitting acoustic engineers, their very presence shaping the soundscapes of sacred and secular spaces alike. Take the chapel bridge of Lucerne, where monks once marveled at how evening vespers carried farther and clearer than in any cathedral. The secret, a thriving bat colony in the rafters, their delicate wings and echolocating clicks subtly altering airflow to amplify certain frequencies while dampening others. Builders didn't fully understand the physics, but they recognized the pattern bridges that attracted bats somehow made voices ring like bells across water. The science behind this phenomenon is startlingly precise. Bats favor structures with reverberation times between 1 and 2 seconds, the exact range that enhances human speech and chant. Their droppings, accumulating in specific nooks, acted as natural sound diffusers, breaking up echoes that would otherwise muddy sacred music. Some bridge chapels, like the one at Regensburg Steinenbruck, even featured bat baffles, curved wooden panels that encouraged roosting directly above the choir, their guano piles strategically positioned to optimize acoustics below. This wasn't just happenstance. Church records show sextons meticulously tracking bat movements, adjusting service times to coincide with peak activity when the creature's wing beats added a celestial shimmer to hymns. But the relationship went beyond music. Bat guano, rich in saltpeter, became a prized resource for gunpowder production. The vaults of Spain's Puente de San Martin were deliberately designed with inverted arches to create ideal roosting conditions, their ceilings scraped clean every fortnight by guano monks who traded the nitrogen-rich deposits to armorers. In England, the Crown claimed rights to all bridge bat waste after discovering spans like London's produced enough saltpeter for 3 barrels of gunpowder annually. Some bridges even housed specialized bat towers, their spiral staircases allowing collectors to harvest vertically while minimizing disturbance to the colonies. The architectural adaptations were ingenious. Narrow, whisper galleries beneath certain arches amplified sound exactly where bats preferred to nest, their curved surfaces focusing echolocation waves to help the animals navigate while simultaneously enhancing human hearing. Builders in Bologna went further, embedding hollow terracotta tubes into bridge piers marketed as bat shelters. They actually functioned as Helmholtz resonators, tuning the structure's acoustic profile like a giant wooden instrument. Modern audio engineers studying these bridges have found their frequency responses match those of high-end concert halls, proving medieval builders achieved sonic perfection through biological collaboration rather than mathematical calculation. Perhaps the most poetic legacy lies in the night watches. Guards patrolling bat-rich bridges often reported hearing phantom choirs, a phenomenon now attributed to the colony's subsonic vibrations interacting with stone. These singing bridges became pilgrimage sites, their eerie harmonies considered proof of divine favor. Today, as conservationists work to restore bat populations to historic spans, they're rediscovering an ancient truth. The best architecture doesn't impose order on nature, but listens to its rhythms, weaving them into something greater than either could achieve alone. Snakes slithered silently through the cracks of medieval bridges, turning engineering marvels into death traps. Workers repairing the Adalaj stepwell in 15th century India told chilling stories of cobras striking from shadowy crevices, their venom dropping laborers mid-task. But what seemed like a curse held an unexpected solution. The stepwell's architects introduced mongoose colonies into the structure's lower chambers. These wiry predators didn't just hunt snakes. Their constant scrabbling vibrations acted as an early warning system, sending reptiles fleeing long before humans descended. Soon, builders across Gujarat were incorporating mongoose gates into new bridges' small access tunnels that allowed the animals to patrol while keeping them safely separated from travelers above. Europe faced a deadlier challenge. Unlike India's predictable cobras, the vipers nesting in French and German bridges were ambush hunters, perfectly camouflaged against mossy stones. The collapse of the Teufelsbrück in 1403 was blamed not on poor craftsmanship, but on a nest of adders whose writhing bodies had loosened key mortar joints. Terrified workers refused to repair certain spans, calling them serpent bridges, haunted by the souls of bitten men. This superstition held a kernel of truth. Analysis of medieval medical records shows bridge builders suffered snakebite rates 3 times higher than other trades. Ingenious solutions emerged from this fear. Venetian engineers began mixing crushed garlic and sulfur into their mortar, creating a repellent stench that kept reptiles at bay. The Pont del Gugli still bears faint traces of this recipe, its foundations curiously free of snake fossils found in other bridges of its era. Meanwhile, English masons took a different approach. They embedded bundles of sharpened reeds into fresh mortar, creating prickly barriers too uncomfortable for snakes to nest against. These thorn joints became a trademark of 14th century repairs, their effectiveness proven by the lack of serpent-related accidents in bridge ledgers afterward. The most fascinating adaptation might be the singing stones of Spain's Puente del Diablo. Workers here noticed snakes avoided arches where the wind produced faint whistling sounds. By carving narrow channels into certain blocks, they created perpetual high-frequency tones inaudible to humans but unbearable to reptiles. Modern herpetologists confirm many snake species are highly sensitive to specific vibrations, suggesting medieval builders stumbled onto an ancient form of pest control. These serpentine encounters left lasting marks on bridge lore. The infamous Curse of Mont Saint-Michel originated when a bridge worker slew a nesting viper, only for its mate to strangle him in his sleep, a tale likely embellished but rooted in very real dangers. Other legends held that bridges with snake problems would mysteriously shed their skin, flakes of mortar appearing like scales after heavy rains. Today, restoration teams still watch for this phenomenon, knowing it might reveal hidden voids where medieval masons battled nature's most elusive architects. The lesson was clear. Even the most feared creatures could drive innovation, their very threats pushing human ingenuity to new heights. Deer didn't just cross rivers, they designed the blueprint for some of history's most ingenious bridges. Deep in Scotland's Caledonian forest, medieval hunters made a startling discovery. Where deer trails met rushing streams, the animals would pause, sniff the wind, then bound across on carefully selected fallen trees. These weren't random crossings. The deer consistently chose trunks with just the right curvature to create stable arches, their sharp hooves leaving telltale grooves in the bark. Observant woodsmen realized these deer roads marked nature's perfect crossing points, where water flow and bank stability aligned. By the 1200s, they'd begun replicating these organic designs, creating the first deer leap bridges, suspended walkways of woven heather and deer sinew that swayed like living things underfoot. The construction secrets lay in the details. Just as deer selected trees with specific flexibility, human builders harvested young ash and willow for their springy resilience. The bridge's distinctive humped shape wasn't artistic flair. It exactly matched the arc of a deer's leap, distributing weight dynamically as travelers crossed. Some Highland clans took the imitation further, soaking the ropes in deer urine to deter wolves, capitalizing on the prey animal's natural fear pheromones. The most sophisticated versions even incorporated false trails, diverging paths that mimicked deer detours, subtly guiding users away from weakened sections. This biomimicry reached its zenith with the legendary Drochaid na H Aben Derge, or Red River Bridge. Chroniclers describe how builders staked out a prime buck for weeks, noting every log it tested with its front hooves before committing to a crossing. When the animal finally chose its path, workers marked the exact spots where its hind legs pushed off, revealing the ideal points to anchor support ropes. The resulting bridge stood for 3 centuries. Its design principles later adapted for early suspension bridges like Scotland's iconic Men I Strait crossing. Deer-inspired engineering wasn't limited to materials. The animal's warning system, a sharp stomp that vibrates through the ground, inspired early structural monitoring. Builders hung hollow antlers from bridge cables. If the bones began rattling without wind, it signaled dangerous tension in the ropes. Some Welsh bridges still bear grooves called cloven marks, not from actual hooves, but from tools used to test wood density, another technique borrowed from observing how deer test branches with their teeth before browsing. The legacy of these graceful engineers endures in modern wildlife bridges, those green overpasses helping animals cross highways today. Their curved designs and textured surfaces owe more to medieval deer leap bridges than most realize, proving that sometimes progress means circling back to nature's original blueprints. Next time you see a deer frozen mid-stride at a forest edge, consider it might not just be crossing the landscape. It could be reading it like an engineer surveys a blueprint, its instincts mapping the strongest path forward. Pigs didn't just cross London Bridge, they rewrote its history in a single night of flaming chaos. The year was 1212, and the bridge was more than just a river crossing. It was a teeming marketplace, a residential street, and a livestock highway, all crammed onto one precarious wooden span. That autumn evening started like any other, with merchants frying fish over open braziers and farmers driving their pigs to slaughterhouses south of the Thames. Then came the scream. A runaway sow, startled by a collapsing crate, barreled into a fire pit. The panicked herd followed, their stampede scattering burning coals across straw-strewn planks. Within minutes, flames licked up the bridge's tightly packed houses, trapping families between walls of fire and the icy river below. By dawn, half the bridge was ash, and London had learned a brutal lesson. When animals and infrastructure collide, disaster doesn't just knock, it charges in on cloven hooves. What made this catastrophe so transformative wasn't just the destruction, it was the revelations that followed. Investigators discovered the bridge's design had amplified the chaos. Its famous starlings, those boat-shaped supports beneath the piers, created swirling currents that fanned the flames, while the tightly packed buildings acted like a chimney, funneling smoke and heat into deadly vortexes. The pigs themselves became accidental arson investigators, their singed bodies found clustered at specific weak points, revealing where the fire had spread fastest. This grim evidence led to one of history's first building codes addressing animal traffic, the 1215 Ordinances for Bridges, which mandated separate dawn and dusk livestock crossings, fireproof stone troughs for cooking fires, and most radically, a 6-foot clearance between buildings to create fire breaks. But the pigs' legacy went deeper than regulations. Their panic exposed how medieval bridges functioned as shared ecosystems. The surviving bridge ledgers show an unexpected pattern. After the fire, toll collectors began tracking not just the number of animals crossing, but their behavior. Skittish herds in winter might signal icy planks needing straw, while agitated chickens often preceded summer storms that could swell the river. Animals had become living weather vanes and structural monitors long before modern sensors existed. Even the bridge's reconstruction reflected this new awareness. The rebuilt sections featured wider alcoves where animals could step aside if spooked, and the first recorded use of rounded coping stones to prevent hooves from catching. The most enduring change, though, was cultural. Londoners developed what we'd now call animal infrastructure literacy, reading bridge safety through creatures' instincts. Chroniclers noted how dogs would refuse to cross during high winds, or how geese hissed at unstable planks long before they creaked. This hard-won wisdom spread across Europe. By the 1300s, bridges from Paris to Prague employed swine wardens to monitor livestock behavior as an early warning system. The practice endured for centuries. When London Bridge was finally demolished in 1831. Workers found layers of burnt oak preserved beneath the stones, silent witnesses to that night when pigs taught humanity a fiery lesson about sharing spaces with the wild. Frogs didn't just croak near medieval bridges, they whispered secrets of chemistry to anyone patient enough to listen. Builders along the marshy fens of England noticed something peculiar. Spans like the Frogmarsh Bridge in Gloucestershire stood strong for centuries while others crumbled within decades. The difference, the mortar between its stones held an uncanny resemblance to the crusty deposits left by evaporating frog ponds. When analyzed, both shared high concentrations of calcium-rich minerals leached from the amphibians' watery habitats. This wasn't mere coincidence, it was nature's recipe for durability, written in the crystalline patterns of dried marsh water. Alchemists took the observation to fantastical extremes. Manuscripts from the Abbey of St. Gall detail elaborate rituals where powdered frog bones were mixed into lime mortar during specific moon phases, believed to transfer the creature's legendary resilience to stone. A 13th century Catalan recipe book even prescribed the femur of a green frog, ground fine with eggshell and morning dew, as a binding agent. While we now know frog bones contribute nothing to structural integrity, the practice reveals how closely medieval builders linked animal biology to material science. The truth lay hidden in the frog's environment. Their wetland homes filtered water through limestone beds, infusing it with minerals that accidentally created a primitive form of self-healing concrete when mixed with mortar. The most compelling evidence comes from reverse engineering. Modern tests on mortar samples from amphibian-rich regions show crystalline structures identical to those found in Roman seawater concrete, known for its self-repairing properties. Frogs, it seems, led medieval masons to rediscover an ancient innovation through observation rather than scholarship. Bridges like France's Pont aux Grenouilles still bear visible proof. Their mortar joints host living ecosystems of algae and microorganisms, the same organisms thriving in frog ponds that continuously deposit mineral reinforcements. This ecological wisdom shaped entire construction traditions. Venetian engineers dug artificial frog ponds near quarries to age their water before mixing mortar, while German builders layered reed beds beneath bridge foundations to replicate wetland filtration. The practice reached its zenith with Scotland's so-called singing bridges, whose mortar contained crushed seashells, a nod to the calcium-rich diets of local frogs. Even today, restoration teams working on medieval spans deliberately reintroduce frog populations, recognizing their habitats as natural monitors of water quality. When the amphibians thrive, it signals the perfect mineral balance for preserving ancient stonework. The ultimate irony, those alchemists grinding frog bones weren't entirely wrong, just misguided. Modern studies show some species' skin secretions contain calcite-binding proteins that do enhance crystallization. Nature had hidden the real magic not in their bones, but in the very slime medieval workers washed from their hands. It's a humbling reminder that the best engineering often comes not from dominating the wild, but from deciphering its quiet, croaking codes. Bees didn't just buzz around medieval bridges, they became master craftsmen in their own right, their wax serving as nature's perfect sealant. The secret lay in the unique properties of beeswax, which, when mixed with pine resin and animal fat, created a waterproof coating far more durable than anything medieval chemists could concoct. Workers would heat this sticky concoction in vast cauldrons, then pour it into the seams of wooden bridges, where it hardened into a flexible barrier that repelled water while allowing the planks to expand and contract with the seasons. The technique was so effective that some wax-sealed spans outlasted their stone counterparts, their timbers preserved like artifacts in amber, but the relationship went deeper than mere materials. Beekeepers discovered that hives placed strategically near bridge entrances served as natural security systems. The honey bridge of Loire-Etcher in France became legendary not just for its golden wax coatings, but for the aggressive strain of bees cultivated in its towers. These insects, bred for their territorial instincts, would swarm anyone tampering with the structure after dark. Records from 1423 describe would-be thieves abandoning their tools mid-breach, their hands swollen from stings while the bridge remained untouched. The hives became such effective deterrents that many towns paid beekeepers in toll exemptions to maintain colonies on their spans. The economics of this partnership were surprisingly sophisticated. At the height of the medieval wax trade, certain bridges functioned as apiary hubs, their honey sales funding everything from routine maintenance to emergency repairs. The Pont-au-Mille in Toulouse even minted special tokens redeemable for honeycombs as a form of local currency. Monks at nearby abbeys kept meticulous ledgers tracking wax production, noting how bridges with south-facing hives yielded 30% more material, a fact that influenced later designs to optimize sunlight exposure. Perhaps the most ingenious adaptation was the bee arch, a feature found in some Italian bridges where hollow chambers in the stonework regulated temperature and humidity for optimal honey production. These weren't just niches, they were carefully engineered microclimates, with ventilation shafts sized to create precise airflow patterns. Modern beekeepers studying these structures have found their designs align perfectly with contemporary hive management principles, proving medieval builders understood bee behavior far better than we assumed. The legacy of these winged collaborators endures in unexpected ways. Restoration teams working on ancient bridges still occasionally find pockets of original beeswax mortar, its scent still faintly sweet after centuries. And the next time you see a historic span with unusual alcoves or oddly placed towers, look closer. You might be staring at the ruins of a medieval skep, where generations of bees once worked in silent partnership with human hands to keep the world connected. The ground trembled long before the bison appeared, a deep, rhythmic pounding that sent villagers scrambling from their fields. In 1347, Hungary's Great Stone Bridge at Sisorna stood firm against floods and wars, but nothing could withstand the thunder of 10,000 migrating bison. Witnesses described the moment with awe, the lead bulls reaching the span first, their massive weight testing the arches, then the catastrophic crack as the herd's momentum turned the structure into a crumbling domino line. Within minutes, a critical trade route vanished beneath hooves and churning water, leaving behind a lesson etched in rubble. Bridges weren't just human spaces, but shared terrain where animal instincts trumped engineering. This disaster sparked a revolution in design. Across Eastern Europe, oxen fords began appearing, shallow, reinforced river crossings built parallel to main bridges, their gravel beds and stepped banks mimicking natural migration paths. Unlike traditional fords, these were carefully engineered to guide herds safely away from human infrastructure. The ones near Poland's Białowieża forest even featured bison baffles, staggered stone pillars that forced the animals to slow and single file, preventing the deadly pile-ups that had doomed Sisorna. Builders took cues from nature itself, observing how bison naturally chose the firmest riverbeds, then replicating those conditions with layered stone and woven willow barriers. The ingenuity didn't stop there. In the Carpathian Mountains, migratory routes were mapped with startling precision. Shepherds carved notches into trees marking annual paths, creating a living atlas that bridge planners consulted to avoid conflict points. Some Hungarian towns employed beast watchers, scouts who tracked herd movements and rang warning bells when migrations neared key spans. Their logs reveal an early understanding of animal behavior, noting, for example, that bison would refuse to cross bridges during the height of rutting season, when their heightened aggression made them prone to charging supports. What's remarkable is how these adaptations blurred the line between infrastructure and ecology. The oxen fords became thriving ecosystems in their own right, their gently sloping banks attracting not just bison but deer, wild horses, and even fish spawning grounds. Modern conservationists studying these sites have found their designs anticipated wildlife corridors by centuries. The fords' alternating deep and shallow zones created ideal resting spots for migrating herds, while submerged rocks provided footing without disrupting water flow, a far cry from the jagged riprap of later industrial bridges. The legacy of these medieval experiments lives on in unexpected ways. When Yellowstone National Park designed its bison crossings in the 1990s, engineers borrowed directly from the baffle concept pioneered in Eastern Europe. And the next time you see a highway wildlife overpass, look closely. Its gradual inclines and natural substrates owe more to those oxen fords than to modern concrete. The bison of Sisorna may have brought a bridge down, but in doing so, they taught us to build with the wild rather than against it. Their hoof prints, long vanished from the riverbank, still guide the way. High in the mist-shrouded valleys of the Himalayas, villagers didn't just build bridges, they stole blueprints from nature's most daring engineers. Macaque monkeys, with their uncanny ability to navigate dizzying chasms on nothing but vines, became living surveyors for human builders. Locals would track entire troops for weeks, noting which routes the primates chose during monsoon season when swollen rivers made crossings deadly. The monkeys' criteria were precise. They favored routes with specific wind patterns that stabilized swaying vines, rock faces with just enough microfractures to grip but not crumble, and trees whose roots ran deep enough to anchor makeshift bridges. When humans replicated these choices, their rope spans lasted generations. When they ignored them, the results were often fatal. This interspecies collaboration went beyond passive observation. At Nepal's Trisulai River, chronicles describe bridge monkeys, macaques trained by monks to carry lightweight tools across unfinished spans. These agile couriers would scramble across hemp cables before they were fully secured, their movements helping workers identify weak points. Some temples even kept resident monkey troops as living stress testers, rewarding them with fruit for crossing newly repaired sections while scribes recorded which planks they avoided. The most skilled primates could balance bundles of bamboo slats nearly their own weight, their routes mapping the safest paths for human builders to follow. The engineering secrets hidden in monkey behavior were astonishing. Their preferred crossing angles, typically between 30 and 45 degrees, matched the ideal tension ratios later codified by modern suspension bridge physics. Their habit of shaking vines before committing to a crossing wasn't just caution. It distributed their weight dynamically, a technique Himalayan builders mimicked by intentionally weaving flexible dance floors into their bridges. Even the monkey's social habits influenced design when dominant males forced younger ones to test new routes. Villagers recognized it as nature's version of quality control, adapting the practice by sending apprentices across first with safety ropes. Perhaps the most remarkable legacy lies in the bridges themselves. The surviving rope spans of the Annapurna circuit still bear subtle markers of simian influence. Handrail knots spaced at exact macaque arm spans, resting platforms at intervals matching troop travel patterns, and even monkey gates, small openings that allow the animals to pass through without damaging the structure. Modern engineers studying these bridges have found their organic designs outperform steel alternatives in earthquake zones, their inherent flexibility a direct inheritance from watching primates move through the canopy. This silent partnership extended into spiritual practice. Many Himalayan bridges feature carved monkey gargoyles not as decoration, but as spiritual guardians, their faces always turned upwind where they could sniff out coming storms. Some Sherpa communities still perform an annual rope dance, where villagers mimic monkey movements to test bridge integrity, their chants echoing the same calls macaques used to warn troop members of danger. It's a living tradition that blurs the line between human and animal, between engineering and instinct, proving that sometimes the best technology isn't invented, it's learned from the wild experts who mastered it first. Ravens didn't just nest on bridges, they became the original structural engineers, their black wings brushing against the boundaries between myth and science. When Prague's Judith Bridge crumbled into the Vieltava River in 1342, survivors swore the ravens had known first. Weeks before the disaster, the bridge's resident flock, birds that had nested in its arches for generations, vanished without a trace. To medieval minds, this wasn't coincidence, it was prophecy. The birds' sudden absence became legend, their instincts revered as divine warnings. But what seemed like supernatural foresight was something far more remarkable: nature's early warning system, honed over millennia. Modern researchers have uncovered the startling truth behind these legends. Corvids, ravens, crows, and their kin possess an extraordinary sensitivity to infrasound, the low-frequency vibrations humans can't detect. A bridge on the verge of collapse emits subtle tremors, imperceptible to workers but screamingly obvious to birds attuned to the slightest shifts in their environment. Their abrupt departures weren't omens but biomechanical calculations, flight decisions made when structural harmonics crossed some invisible threshold. Medieval observers, lacking the vocabulary of vibration analysis, encoded this phenomenon into lore. The ravens of Judith Bridge didn't predict the future, they diagnosed the present with terrifying accuracy. This symbiosis between bird and builder went beyond passive observation. In Nuremberg, bridge keepers maintained raven roosts, elevated platforms where the birds were encouraged to nest. their presence or absence serving as a living diagnostic tool. Records from 1520 show city officials delaying a festival when ravens abandoned the Fleshbrook, a decision that proved life-saving when the span cracked days later. Other cities took inspiration from nature's engineers, incorporating crow steps into bridge designs, jagged parapets that mimic the uneven branches corvids prefer, ensuring they'd always have ideal vantage points to monitor the structure. The bird's influence extended into bridge economics. Toll collectors in medieval Regensburg adjusted rates based on avian activity. Spans with thriving raven colonies commanded premium fees, their reputations for safety bolstered by the bird's apparent approval. Some enterprising keepers even staged raven calls, scattering food to attract the birds during inspections, knowing their presence would reassure nervous travelers. The practice became so widespread that certain bridge guilds required apprentices to study corvid behavior as part of their training, recognizing these feathered consultants as vital to their craft. What's most fascinating is how corvid wisdom was preserved. Before blueprints, before stress tests, there were bestiaries illustrated manuscripts where ravens perched on crumbling arches became shorthand for structural instability. The Aberdeen bestiary, penned in 1200, depicts this exact scene with an eerie caption: "When the black ones flee, so too must mankind." Centuries later, engineers studying the London Millennium Bridge's infamous wobble discovered that local crows had avoided it weeks before humans noticed the sway. The lesson echoes across time. Sometimes progress doesn't mean inventing new tools, but relearning how to read the old one's nature left in plain sight, written not in ink, but in the beating of dark wings against the dawn. From elephants to earthworms, every creature great and small left its mark on the bridges of the medieval world. These weren't just structures of stone and timber, they were living documents of an ongoing conversation between humans and the wild. Think of the oxen whose patient steps defined the weight limits of archers, or the swallows whose nesting choices revealed hidden weaknesses in mortar. Even the lowly earthworm played its part, its burrows aerating the soil beneath foundations, preventing the slow sink that doomed so many spans. Every animal, whether ally or obstacle, was a co-author in the story of these crossings. What's astonishing is how these lessons echo into our modern world. Today's engineers are rediscovering what medieval builders knew instinctively: the best infrastructure works with nature, not against it. Wildlife corridors now mimic the oxen fords that diverted bison herds, while sensor systems on bridges detect vibrations much like ravens once did with their uncanny sensitivity. Even the humble beaver, once seen as a nuisance, is now hailed as a partner in flood prevention, its dams inspiring sustainable designs. The past isn't just history, it's a blueprint we're still learning to read. So the next time you stroll across an old stone bridge, pause for a moment. Run your fingers along the grooves where cartwheels once rolled, but also look for the subtler traces, the hollows where bats still roost at dusk, the mossy patches frogs once favored, or the distant cry of a raven that might have nested there for centuries. These bridges are more than relics, they're living museums of a forgotten collaboration. And if you listen closely, you might just hear the whispers of paws, wings, and hooves that helped build them. Got a local legend about a bridge shaped by animals, maybe a tale of a spectral hound guarding a crossing, or swallows that return to the same arch every spring? Drop your stories in the comments, we'd love to hear them. And if you're hungry for more tales where history and nature collide, hit that subscribe button. After all, the past isn't just human, sometimes it's got claws.